Speaking of the application of standard deviation, outliers. An outlier is a value that is either significantly higher or that is significantly lower than the rest of the values. So sometimes you'll just be able to identify just by looking at it. It's like, yep, that seems out of place. But we're going to talk about, and actually let me add a word here, that is statistically significantly different. So significantly higher or lower, to be specific. Now, when we're in person, I often talk about, like, the easiest example is referring to ages of people in the classroom. Most people in the classroom are like 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, whereas there's your teacher, who's a bit of an outlier. Now, outliers always have a strong effect on the mean and standard deviation. It's always going to affect the standard deviation by making it larger. Standard deviation in general is going to talk about how far apart the data is spread. Now, the mean, it's going to go up if it's a high outlier, and the mean is going to go down if it's a low outlier. Now, if an outlier is the result of measurement error or represents data from the wrong population, we usually just take it out. There are different ways to determine what value is an outlier. One way to look at it is what we're going to start with here, is to identify values that are more than 3 standard deviations from the mean. We're going to hammer that out in detail on this next example. So more than 3 standard deviations of the mean. Now, we're asked to find the mean and standard deviation for the heights of 15 cans. We're asked to identify any outliers and describe how they affect the mean and standard deviation. So here's a data set, lots of 92s. They're all fairly close to each other. You might be able to identify what could be an outlier here. Now, in order for us to do this, we could go through and do everything we just did in the previous example, but that seems like a lot of work, so we're going to actually take a look at how to do this on the calculator as well. So you might see on here it says a list of instructions. I'm going to kind of walk you through these instructions. So let me jump over to the calculator. Let me change my screen here so that you can actually see the calculator. And let me shrink this up just a little bit. Okay, so let's go through into our calculator, start typing the information. Now what you're going to need to do is go into Stat, and then go to Edit, the first one there. And then we're going to clear out anything that's in there. So like if you have some values in L2 that you don't want there, just go up to the column title, hit clear, hit enter, and it'll clear it out. So make sure you're in L1. We're only going to use L1 here. So go through and enter in all the values. I don't care what order you do them in. I'm probably just going to go column by column. So give me just a second as I type these in. Sorry, let me just type these in because it's harder for me to type them when I'm not looking at the calculator directly. Okay, just double checking as you're scrolling through. Double check all your values. Once you get to the last value, make sure it says L1 and that says 15 there, because there are a total of 15 data points in this set. So we've got 5 in this column, 5 in this column, 5 in this column. So there's 15 data points. Double check, make sure you type them all correctly. They should all start with 92. Just double check, make sure you didn't accidentally type one more than you needed to, or type one that you didn't need to. Now, from here, we're asked to find the standard deviation. And we're going to use our calculator to do that, and we're going to go to Stat. We're going to go to Calc, and now we don't need to scroll down. Like previously, we went to options like 4, 5, 6, actually probably not 4, but 5, 6, and 7, and also option number 0. We're actually going to use the top one there, and it says 1 var stats. So click on that. If you're using a TI-84, it'll probably pop up with this. If you're using an 83, it probably will just say 1 var stats, you hit enter. The list we're using is L1. We don't need to worry about anything else. Let's just go down to Calculate, and ta-da! There's our information. Now, it gives us a mean of about 92.77. So x bar is about 92.77. And the other piece of information that we need is this sigma here. So that sigma right there, which is about 0.195. Now, in case you're not following along with these directions, you can also follow along with these directions because we're pretty much doing the same thing, just working through each of these steps. Now, step 3 says identify any outliers. Look for the data values that are more than 3 standard deviations away from the mean in either direction. The way I do this is I often just kind of do a visual. I take the mean, 92.77, and then I draw an arrow going one direction and then also the lower direction. Now, when we add 3 standard deviations, what we're really doing is we're adding 3 times that 0.195. So when you add 3 times 0.195 to 92.77, we end up with 93.355. Now, going in the other direction, we're going to subtract 3 standard deviations. In other words, we're going to subtract 3 times 0.195. And you can type that into your calculator. When you do, you end up with 92.185. So essentially, the 92.185 is the lowest value you can have without being an outlier. And then the 93.355 is the highest value we can have without being an outlier. Now, looking at the data set again, we have one value that's lower than 92.185. It's not much lower, but it is lower. It's that 92.1. So we're going to say 92.1 is an outlier. It's too low. Now, when we find an outlier, the next thing for us to do is to actually remove that outlier from the data set. So let's go back to stat. We'll go back to edit, and we're going to find that 92.1. There it is. And to clear it out, we can actually hit delete, and it's just gone. So now what we're going to do is we're going to recalculate the mean and standard deviation. So if I go to stat, go to the calc, and again, 1 var stats. Again, 1 var stats stands for one variable statistics. I don't know if I said that earlier. But we'll choose 1 var stats, hit enter, and go through to calculate. And you'll see the mean goes up to 92.82, and the standard deviation went down because all the data points are closer together. So now we're dealing with a 92.82 mean, so it went up because we had a really low outlier that was bringing everything down, and the standard deviation is much, much closer now. So the data points are way closer than they had been.